Many of you will have seen Tony do his fun performance. Now we're going to see a more serious side of Tony, and he's going to be talking about tactical blinking in Magicians.
Thank you. Excited to be here to tell you about the strangest, most labor-intensive project I've ever been a part of. I have made a variety of materials available. The paper from this work will be published in the special section of Psychology of Consciousness that Soma has put together that'll come out in September. And I've made a preprint of the paper available at this URL. I'll show it again at the end. All right. How's the clicker working? So every few seconds, people blind themselves to the visual world when they blink their eyes. And blinking has the obvious purpose of moistening your eyeballs, but it serves a variety of other purposes as well. Some eye blinks are related to external stimulation, so-called reflexive and voluntary eye blinks. Others serve as purposes unrelated to external stimulation, and instead they seem to index internal cognitive processes. These endogenous eye blinks often bookend moments of high cognitive load. These eye blinks are strategic in that they're timed not to interfere with iconic memory or with extraction of meaningful information from the world. And as such, they're also predictive. We time our eye blinks at moments when we anticipate there to be little informative information out in the world. It seems that magicians may unwittingly have taken advantage of endogenous eye blinks. Weissman and Nakano explored blink synchronization in participants watching a magic trick performed by Teller of Penn and Teller. They coded the video for moments of effect when the audience was experiencing magic and method when secret actions were occurring. And remarkably, they found that many of the moments of greatest blink synchrony in their audiences happened at the end of magic effects. Those are those orangish dots. They also frequently correspond to moments when Teller was engaging in deceptive action, the pink dots. So the structure of Teller's routine communicated to the audience, nothing to see here. And so they felt comfortable taking that cue, blinking their eyes, thereby blinding themselves to Teller's shenanigans. So this is an instance where audience blink behavior actually aids the magician. However, a magician's blinking behavior can serve an alternative purpose, one that may undermine that magician's ability to deceive. Anecdotal accounts have identified blinking as a potential problem for rehearsing magicians. In order to adopt the perspective of their audience, magicians often rehearse before a mirror. Magician Jay Sankey observed that just as Narcissus became obsessed with his own reflection in the waters and eventually drowned, so too do some magicians succumb to their practice mirrors and come to unconsciously edit their own experience of their sleights, rendering them virtually invisible. How? By blinking. Through what we're calling tactical blinking, magicians may be blinding themselves to the efficacy or lack thereof of their own sleight of hand. And while this blinking behavior may seem like an irrelevant quirk in a strange subset of the population, we see it as something even more interesting. We think it could represent a clear, demonstrable case of self-deception. Magicians know when they will be engaging in deceptive action, and they edit those moments out of their awareness in order to maintain their positive illusions about their abilities. If this is true, it could be the first clear instance of self-deception that psychological science has been searching for decades. So despite assertions from popular psychology where they bandy on about our tendencies towards self-deception, the evidence to support the existence of self-deception is actually pretty scant. Of course, there are different flavors of self-deception, and I'd argue that some of them probably shouldn't be counted as self-deception, where a person knows the truth and actively excludes that truth from their consciousness. Chance and Norton described a few different flavors of self-deception. What they call deflationary self-deception is motivated reasoning that allows you to maintain positive illusions. So confirmation bias is like the best example, right? Like where you actively seek out information that supports your beliefs and you ignore or fail to seek out evidence that disconfirms your beliefs about the world. I'm hesitant to call this self-deception, though, because it can't differentiate between instances where people have processed disconfirmatory evidence and instances where they've so effectively filtered their attention that they haven't been presented with disconfirmatory evidence. Under this definition, people who watch highly biased news sources are engaging in self-deception, even though they may never have been exposed to evidence that disconfirms their beliefs. Motivated false belief, the next category here, requires that people hold their erroneous beliefs in the face of disconfirming evidence. But this definition, so it requires denial of counter evidence, but it could be through a process of discounting, right? So our biased news viewer might be exposed to alternative information, but label it fake news so that they don't have to consider it any further. Again, it feels like a stretch to call it self-deception. The third variety is the most stringent. It requires a set of conscious and unconscious beliefs that contradict each other. The truth must be contained and maintained in our unconscious mind, while the false belief is maintained in consciousness. This is termed deep self-deception. And not surprisingly, this kind of self-deception is incredibly hard to study in the lab. How do you measure a person's unconscious beliefs? So historically, two different studies have been held up as evidence of deep self-deception. Gurr and Sackheim showed that because people are uncomfortable hearing their own voices, they are apt to misattribute short clips of their voice to that of a stranger. However, galvanic skin responses showed that they implicitly recognized their own voice, even though it wasn't available to consciousness. Cute example, but not terribly consequential beyond the contrived laboratory setting. The second example comes from Quattrone and Tversky. In their study, participants kept their hands in an ice bath longer if they thought that it predicted heart health versus future heart disease. So these behaviors suggested that participants were deceiving themselves for fear of the consequences, the negative health consequences that would be associated with acknowledging the pain that they were experiencing. Despite a handful of controls in those studies, it's pretty difficult to rule out impression management as a more parsimonious explanation for their findings. So thus, we were excited to turn our attention to magicians and tactical blinking because it might provide for an identifiable, directly measurable instance of deep self-deception. Okay, so how do we do it? Here is my collaborator, Shawn Eric, beast of a magician. Like Gustav, he was a student of Cellini. Oh man, the things he can do with coins, remarkable. So Shawn and I created a coin magic routine that contained a variety of different sleights that varied in their difficulty and in their kind of frequency of use in the magic community. And we recruited 10 magicians. We gave them 1 week to learn this difficult coin routine. We then brought them into the lab at Magic Inc. in Chicago, and we filmed them performing this routine twice, 4 times actually, twice in a rehearsal setting before a rehearsal mirror, and twice in a performance setting where we just took the mirror away. So we had 3 predictions. First, we predicted that blink rates would increase while participants were engaged in deceptive action. Second, we predicted that this increase would be magnified in the rehearsal setting compared to the performance setting because of the influence of this self-deception. And finally, we expected that blink rates would increase with the difficulty of the sleight, when there might be more motivation to self-deceive. Okay, so we collected these videos and we analyzed them frame by frame. This was about 100,000 frames of video. We first chopped up every individual performance video into moments when the magicians were engaged in deceptive action, we categorize these frames as experimental frames, and instances where they were not engaged in deceptive action. Those frames, video frames, served as control frames that we would compare against the experimental frames. So the second author and I worked through each of these videos, noting the frames where each sleight began and ended, and frames from those blocks of time were the experimental frames, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so after we had separated out those frames, categorized them as either experimental or control, we then went through frame by frame, 2 of us, for every one of these 100,000 frames and noted whether their eyes were open or closed. It was terrible. Never again. And it wasn't always pretty. So let's get to some results. So remember, prediction 1 was that blink rates would increase while participants were engaged in deceptive action. On the x-axis here will be performance condition, whether they were in a rehearsal setting or a performance setting. On the y-axis, the proportion of time, the proportion of frames where their eyes were closed in each of these sets. And the gray bars will represent the experimental frames. So the first thing you should note is there was a main effective frame type. Magicians were more apt to be blinking in experimental frames when they were engaging in deceptive action than in control frames when they were not. However, so that confirmed prediction 1. However, remember, prediction 2 was that this increase would be magnified in the rehearsal setting versus the performance setting. But that's not what happened. That doesn't work. There's no evidence of an increase in the rehearsal setting, but we saw this big increase in blink rates in the experimental frames during performance when they didn't have that visual feedback. So this did not confirm prediction 2. Prediction 3 was that blink rates would increase with the difficulty of the sleight. I'm going to plot proportion of time spent blinking as a function of mean difficulty rating. The difficulty ratings were collected from a different set of magicians. And indeed, we found a significant effect of difficulty, with blink rates increasing as a function of the difficulty of the sleight, thereby supporting prediction number 3. So what's going on here? It seems that this tactical blinking doesn't serve the purpose of self-deception. And if it's not in service of self-deception, what the heck is it all about? What's it mean? Well, although blinking behavior could act as a tell for the audience, it could also offer a nudge to the audience that they've reached a moment where there's little useful information in the visual stream, thereby encouraging them to blink in these moments. Indeed, Nakano and Kitazawa found that television watchers entrained their blinking to the blinking of a speaker in the video, and that this tendency is magnified when the speaker's blinks occur at the end of an idea or during moments of silence. So there wasn't any speech in our performance, but there was clearly narrative content, right? The magician was building a narrative through this performance. And so the construction of the routine may have suggested breaks in the action, just as they did in the experiment with Teller. Performer blinks could further solidify this pacing, encouraging the audience to blink at moments when the magician is engaged in deceptive action. Of course, this is totally speculative, right? It's going to take more research to confirm that hypothesis. In short, while our experiment didn't produce strong evidence for self-deception, it did demonstrate tactical blinking that's in service either of impacting the awareness of the audience or of the magician. We can't tell which. As masters of consciousness manipulation, magicians are a fruitful source of both methods in the study of consciousness and insights into the subtle cues that can shape our awareness of the world. Thank you very much for your attention. And thanks.